Hey there, today we're going to be looking at the different draft archetypes for Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate. We're about to transition into Dominaria United, but it's been a better than expected format, especially with the rebalancing that occurred about a month in. Ended up with 23 trophies, had a stretch of 10 drafts of 10 trophies in a row early on, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, the goal for this is to just figure out what skeletons can look like for draft archetypes, focusing on commons and uncommons. We'll see, I imagine, if and when this comes back to Arena, it'll be the rebalanced alchemy. So we're just going to look at data for the last few weeks since the rebalancing occurred. We'll notice that Azorius started out really strong, but after the rebalancing, Boros did, but Boros, Simic, and even like Selesnya and a little Golgari kind of look to be maybe the top tier. Blue picked up some benefits of just red-white being slowed down a little bit, and some of the black cards like Prowler being nerfed. Plus just a ability to go a little longer in games and have some recursive value. We'll talk about in green. Yeah, it ended up being a pretty balanced format. A lot of win rates you'll see between 57 and 60, with the exception of Izzet, which really probably goes into like a dragon deck. But just of note, if you look at the top tier, the top third of 17 lands, you'll actually see that some of the better performing decks, though in smaller numbers, were like the Gruul decks and even like Dimir, suggesting if you know how to build it and navigate it well, you can do all right. So with that in mind, let's head over to Arena and look at some of these skeletons, deck shells. So we'll start with the big initial boogeyman of the format, white red, and then we'll go into some of the green decks. So the hope or the goal here is get on the board early, had some good, well-costed interaction, or interaction that's 2 for 1, like Sea Tower Imprisonment, or in a way, Guiding Bolt, because you might be able to scry away a land or two, and then just maintain that board presence and just keep attacking. Of note, prior to the rebalancing, Blessed Hippogriff, Steadfast Unicorn, and Patriarch's Humiliation you take as, and Priest of the Ancient Lord, but really those first three, you take as many of those as you can. They're just top performers, phenomenal. After the rebalancing, Humiliation's still great. Probably the best white common with that, and maybe Priest of Ancient Lore. But Unicorn's a little tougher with a cost of 5 to activate, and then Blessed Hippogriff, with its Tears Blessing being 2 and not 1, made it a lot tougher to hold up and still play your creatures mostly on curve, or just off curve by a single man and hold up interaction like a Humiliation or a Blessing. That being said, still a very strong deck. As a reminder, cards that are 2 of tended to perform that are common. We don't have more than one of any particular uncommon, because you just can't count on getting that. But commons where there's 2 of had high game in hand or opening hand win rates, depending on the type of deck you're going for, and performed well in the strategy. And then more or less it's guided by building a deck, not just saying what are the top game in hand win rate cards, and just sorting that way and building the deck that way. But 1s and 2s are strong. Kobold Warcaller played really well because you could get on the board with that on turn 1, and then haste out your Rabble Rouser or a Soldier of the Watch to get the double team going. Just speed up stuff a turn earlier, so you could potentially get your first strike on your Hobgoblin Captains earlier. Things like that. Deck played really well. It was very draftable. The white did start being more contested as the format went on. You still want a deck that's predominantly white. Red was a pretty decent support color. We'll see like white, red, and then we'll kind of see excuse me, black, red as well. As being two reasonable decks with black or white being the stronger colors, and I do it the bigger portion of the deck. And this deck actually is able to go down to 15 or 16 lands very frequently. We'll see a curve that's probably like, 2.3, 2.5, something like that. Yeah, 2.3. With a good number of creatures and then good interaction. You still wanted a unicorn or an ambergris to really help close the game. Ambergris was just an absolute bomb in this deck because you play it, you specialize it, you give all your creatures, between plus 2 or +3/+3, potentially even larger depending on cards in hand. And yeah, that's all I'm trying to say. You could win a game if you didn't just start strong and maintain the tempo advantage. Okay. So this was probably one of the decks that I enjoyed playing the most. We'll make some cards look kind of cool. I will say that I haven't done it here, but oftentimes I would look to splash like an OG in these decks, because you might be able to double spell and blink your Myconid, blink your Druid, your Owlbear, your Air Cult Elemental or Herdgorger. It's not in this build, but this is a deck that could splash because you were really trying to get Myconids, maybe a Pilgrim's Eye or Druid to help ramp you, help fix your mana some. And yeah, the goal, and you'll see this with blue for the most part, it's get on board early with a non-blue color and use blue as support for like countering to catch up, bounce, and then get up to some of the reasonably good blue 5 and 6 drops like Mist Dragon, super strong. Put I guess the new terminology would be put a stun counter on a creature, but if tap the creature doesn't untap for a turn, bounce a creature, It gives you some interaction at the top end. Like a Dreadlenorm for interaction as well. This didn't have to play like a dragon deck. It could just play like a kind of mid-rangey to almost controlling, but it's not your traditional control. You're trying to kill everything. You just do some bounce to buy time, so you could drop some bigger threats to stabilize, and then hopefully a Dreadlenorm or a Flyer to just go over the top and take it down. We'll say deck benefited from Circle of the Land Druid, though wasn't great in this deck. It's probably a little better in the black-green deck, where you want cards in your graveyard that you might bring back with like a Summon Undead, or even like a Viconia. But Circle of the Land Druid and Druidic Ritual were cards that the deck really benefited from after the rebalancing. Plus, you come to a river, turn into a reasonable removal spell in some way. Put it on the top to blank a draw, or put it on the bottom just get rid of the creature. But yeah, solid cards. You found the best of blue with some of the best of green. So the deck tended to play very well together. I will note, because green doesn't have the same early drops as the Mardu colors black, white, and red have. You could supplement that with like the Undersimplify, or trying to catch up with like a Hypnotic Pattern to help you have a favorable combat potentially. Or ideally, you get like an Innkeeper or a Land Druid to stabilize the board, maybe gain some life or ramp you. Yeah, it's a fun deck. Oftentimes did come together well. And if you could draft some good rares that were splashable, in one of your colors potentially, or maybe not both if they're just single pips and you do get enough fixing with the package of Myconid, Pilgrim's Eye, and Druid of the Emerald Grove, you could do some fun stuff in this deck. Okay. And then Blue-Black did turn out being a reasonable deck as the format went on and the rebalancing. And a lot of it because, like we talked about before, Blue had a reasonable late game. You just had to get to it. And Black actually had a pretty decent early game. The early game was stronger when we had Guildsworn Prowlers a 2-1. But it's still reasonable. It can block if you need to. It can put in some pressure. You can like sack it to a a Skullport Merchant, for example. If this had a Deadly Dispute, which is fine in this deck, you sack it to a Deadly Dispute if you need to. But yeah, this is about trying to set up some defensive speed with cards like Shambling Ghast or Ghostform Prowler, or like Undersimplify to keep the opponent from pressing their advantage if they have it. And then some good interaction, oftentimes at instant speed, like the Grave Choice, Castellan, and Sewer Plague. And then ramp up to some reasonably sized creatures with evasion, like some good flyers, or like Saravok can oftentimes make your creatures that are kind of dinky, like a Pilgrim's Eye, a Vampire Spawn, whatever, pretty formidable. And even Pseudo Dragon Familiar can be good to like turn your Savarak into a flyer, go to the air, whatever you give it flying, give it plus X plus O2. It wasn't a must-have or anything, but it was useful. And then Baconia, if you can specialize in blue, this is it's already a great card, but being able to get back instant or sorcery and a creature from either graveyard, I mean, imagine, double casting, a Castellan or a Grave Choice or a Grim Bounty, plus getting back, one of these top-end creatures or something you killed of your opponents. Worked very well. So this deck was good at setting some early road bumps and getting some late game, strong cards. And the last part of that kind of top end, tier 1 if you will, flat green. And this ended up being a little more contested after the rebalancing, as people kind of saw, they were nerfing, white a little bit. They were bumping up some of the green and the blue shenanigans. And this just really said, do graveyard stuff with Circle the Land Druid, with Druidic Ritual, already having Summon Undead, already having, creatures like Baconia if you were fortunate enough to get one. And just asked you to play a mid-range to longer game, have some good interaction, have some recursion, have good threats, and you had, good early threats, like the Myconids, Land Druids, Gas, and good late game, with a Dread the Norm to maybe save a creature and then come down and just attack for you, bring stuff back with Summon Undead or Druidic Ritual. Had a lot of staying power. In particular, this is a deck where you could splash them as well. We're not doing in this shell, but if you got, another really good uncommon or rare creature, you could oftentimes put it in this deck and either splash off of, some treasure, some searching with like a Pilgrim's Eye or Myconid, or even just like pitching to a specialized creature and then bringing back like a Summon Undead. So tons of cool strategies and synergies. And the deck could oftentimes, stabilize against like the white-red or other decks, and had a reasonable enough late game against, the other decks we just talked about that had reasonable late games as well. You did want Myconids. That was probably one of the best, if not the best, common in the set when it was all said and done. But you could benefit from playing a longer game with some of the top end, getting your lands with Druidic Ritual, lands and creatures back with Druidic Ritual, getting lands with Circle the Land Druid. Okay, if we go with, and I guess white green's probably in that top tier too. You're not trying to do life gain shenanigans with white green like you did in like AFR, for example. You're really saying, let's find value and just outvalue the opponent. So you could like start off somewhat aggressive with these builds. You got the white aggressive creatures and some green top end, but oftentimes I didn't play super well together because you're trying to play aggro or play a more controlling mid-range. It didn't work. But oftentimes when you found the good 3-drops and you could supplement it with good interaction, like if you can get a few Humiliations, Dread the Norms, then you could drop your Myconid, your Priest of Ancient Lures, your Pilgrim Eyes, to get 2-for-1s. And then if you were getting cute, this is probably the best deck to splash OG into, because all these creatures you would love to blink, even up to like, the Owlbears, the Herd Gorgers. And then you had enough interaction with like the Sea Tower, Imprisonment, Picture Humiliations, the Scale Deflection, to keep your opponents off balance and put on enough pressure so where you could turn the corner and then, potentially, attack with a big Scanos and get something else Vigilance or Lifelink, or maybe because of the blue splash, Flying, which can just end games and bring back the creatures they do eventually kill, your Lenorms, your Scanos, OG, what have you, with the Druidic Ritual, and just go to Value Town with this deck. So seeing in Myconid and Priest Ancient Lures and Humiliations really helped the deck tick. Dread Lenorm was good. It wasn't essential to have multiple of these, especially if you could bring it back, but it really helped with turning the corner in terms of setting up maybe a favorable attack and using this, or stopping a removal spell, gumming up the board, putting this down, and then being able to attack with it, potentially bring it back if you need to, or blink it if you need to. So it was a fun deck to play. Okay. After that, some of the other decks that were second or third tier. So black, red, again we said black stronger base, red more support. This is another deck where you could splash. It wasn't quite like AFR where you just got treasures on treasure and could do whatever you want. But if you were trying to splash a card that's a common or uncommon, Minthara was probably your best splash, because you're looking to have treasures leave the battlefield to proc this, maybe trade some creatures off, and you had enough threats that could become dangerous. Like you had some flyers, even if it's like a Pilgrim's Eye, but oftentimes a dragon. And then you had some cards that were a little tougher to block, like the Rabble Rousers with 3 toughness that could pump. And then oftentimes in these cards, you're going to have a lot of interaction, and it's no different here. There were some reasonably well-costed, useful, and needed removal spells, like Dragon's Fires, Sewer Plague, Grim Bounty. And then it's not black-red without the Steel Stack element. So you didn't have to lean into that, but it was a cheeky way when the format slowed down a little bit, and people were using a lot of that top end, like we saw, the 5, 6, 7 drops that were big dumb green creatures or blue flyers to steal them, and then sack to a Sepulchre Ghoul or a Skullpoint Merchant, for example, or even a Deadly Dispute. So that still played well in this deck, but you needed to get on the board early and play more of an aggro tempo type of game with this. It wasn't the mid-range, almost even controlling style that you could play in AFR, where you just put some threats and then look to just steal things and have a bigger late game. You needed to have a lower cost deck where you could be double spelling as early as turn 3 or 4, and then be able to close with the flyer or steal and sack type of strategy. And then Dragon's another, generally speaking, tier 2 deck. Oftentimes this could be a little more blue-green, and you just put in some of the better red cards that fill the holes you have. It's like interaction's not great in blue-green, but when you get access to Dragonfire that might be doing 4 damage, 6 damage, 7 damage, that becomes pretty strong. And then we know we have the ramp and the fixing with the Myconids, Pilgrim's Eye, Druid. They played really well. The orbs, once they beat them with a little bit to have add one of any color, did become pretty useful. But I'll say probably the green orb and then the blue orb were the best, because being able to say, I'm going to green orb to keep my Lozon from being able to be targeted until we get to my turn, super useful. Or my Dread Lenorm to ideally be able to get an attack in, because there was instant speed interaction and removal, but a good amount of the format did have sorcery speed, like blue stuff sorcery speed, Grim Bounty sorcery speed, for example. So that did help, and the post almost one counter was nothing to sneeze at. When it was Dread Lenorm probably didn't need it, but being put on a flyer that would say my young blue dragon is a 4/5, or this is a 5/4 mist dragon, this is a 5/3, could be big game. I will say other benefits besides young blue dragon being able to survive a little bit better. Was being able to have the Dragonborn Looter that sometimes come down turn 1 and just help you smooth your draws to get to the mana you need, to just thin the deck a little bit, find some interaction that you might need, like a Scale Deflection or a Dragonfire, or even just put stuff in the graveyard that you can get back later with like a Druidic Ritual. So the deck plays a little more mid-range with some control elements because you do have some interaction, but a lot of this is just try and get defensive speed up, gain some life, put down a 2/3 blocker, or put down like a Myconid, and then start playing, good cards ahead of curve if you can. I will note Alvar Shepherd really overperformed in the format. In particular, it's tough to kill something with 4 toughness outside of like black. And then because green does have enough bigger creatures that you might be able to either get multiple creatures on board that add up to 8, or like a Dreadland Norm that adds up to 8 with the Alvar Shepherd. And that helps you, either if you're a parity, pull ahead, or maybe catch up over a couple turns and then pull ahead. And then being able to bring it back with like a Druidic Ritual. If you don't have better targets like your 5, 6, 7 drops, is also great. We've got. So this is a deck that I did like, and my last trophy was White Blue, so you saw that. But I found that this generally played better as a kind of aggro tempo deck where you try and get on board with some 2 drops, and then you're interacting. You're bouncing in a hand, you're imprisoning, you're humiliating, and then you finish off with some flyers. Maybe it's a Blessed Hippogriff to put one of these like 3/1s into the air, or just playing 4/3, 3/4 flyers that are tough to interact with after you've made some trades in the Grail, maybe take away some other creatures that might potentially block them with your interaction. Unicorn was useful in these decks because you were trying to get on board, but you didn't expect to have them dead by turn 5 or 6. So you can use this to make your ground attacks a little better, or send your flyers over for more damage. So it played really well. And then OG wasn't, unfortunately, at home in this deck, was still good enough to play. You're just not overloaded with instants, and you want to be double spelling. You're not always able to double spell. Oftentimes, your hope or your goal would be have an OG like blink a Priest of Ancient Lore, or blink like a Mist Dragon, or if you had an Air Cult Elemental, blink that, so you can either pull ahead on cards, or keep the opponent off balance, tapping, bouncing creatures, while you maintain or grow your board presence. It's a fun deck. You could play some cards that might not be great in other decks. Like you could play like a Soul Knight Spy, for example, because you're being aggressive enough and you have enough interaction. Oftentimes get in, maybe once. Or this, if you set it up right, you can trade with like a 4 or 5 drop potentially. But yeah, this is about getting on board, getting points, damage when you can, and then finishing off with some of these higher drops. So yeah, that was the format. It was a lot of fun, and helped us be useful when it does come back to Arena, just to get you up to speed. So thanks again.